So Andrew Baggerly, he wrote an article saying that the Giants have been, obviously they had that hot start with Willie Adames. They've been pretty quiet since then. I don't think they've actually made a roster move at all since the Adames thing. And he said that they were very active in trade talks, trying to trade for Garrett, Crochet, and Kyle Tucker, which both are guys that it would have made sense from a roster standpoint. Adding, obviously they could really use another starter, and Kyle Tucker is one of the better pure hitters in baseball and athletic, and just would have helped this team in so many ways. Now, both teams wanted Bryce Eldridge, and the Giants said no, they weren't going to include him in any deal. And frankly, when you look at what was given up for those guys, Bryce Eldridge would have been the best prospect in either deal. So I get that Posey, doesn't want to part with him, but it kind of shines a light on the rest of the system, because they did say they put together packages that made them uncomfortable, but they were still willing to offer it, which that's a good sign, because I felt like with Farhan, he had too many guys that he was just like, I can't part with that guy. Harrison was one of them, and I get it, but now we're kind of looking at it going, should you have? So it tells me, like I mentioned earlier, any player would have been on the table outside of Bryce, which I'm all for, but it kind of shows like this system, it just might not be ready for these guys to be able to actually make the trades that they might want to. And, we pair this up with the Bleacher Report article that came out where they were ranked dead last again. And I've seen a couple different sites that have had the Giants ranked either last or they're like 28th, 29th, they're somewhere in that last couple three. And, I obviously have my feelings on how bad their system is. Like, I think it's actually not quite, god awful or anything like that, but it's definitely lacking in the top end. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on, what do you guys think of the system right now? And you can also tell me about what you think about them trying to be active in trade talks. And then also, how long of a rebuild of this system do you really think it's going to be?
So to your point, it's kind of the opposite as far as what we experienced with Farhan, because he was so unwilling to move his prospects, but at the same time, he was so unwilling to give them a chance. So he just kind of let them rot, which sucks because it killed a lot of their value. Because I think if you're talking some of these guys last year in discussions, that we were having recently in trades for like Tucker or Crochet or whatnot, then you have guys, who used to be higher prospects, Ramos and Luciano and whatnot, where they actually had value. And now all that value is diminished and gone, as referring more towards Luciano. So it sucks because, to your point, and like we touched on briefly earlier, Maniason's he specializes in trades. A lot of these guys that were brought into Posey's front office and his little core, they specialize in trades. They look to make moves like that, and it's clear that they want to do that in order to add some talent on this team. It's just your trade pieces outside of Eldridge are really limited, and it's a shame. So to your point, it's like, what you're left with right now, you're probably not going to be able to get a lot for. But at the same time, some of these other trades that were made, I think like Naylor, for example, with the package that, they gave up for Naylor, you could have done something like a Mason Black, for example, to land them maybe another smaller piece. So it's like, which players are you attempting to move is the question. And if anybody's on the table outside of Bryce, and it's still that hard to, find a trade partner, that just speaks volumes, like you said, as far as what this new regime was left with when they came in. So it might be a couple years to rebuild the farm. I think they can, at least get a start on it this year. But it's tough, because then it kind of goes hand in hand with what's your plan? What's your vision? What's your goal for this team? Do you want to go and rebuild the farm, and you want to rebuild your system and, go with your younger guys? Or do you want to risk signing guys with QOs and giving up more draft capital, more international money, which could potentially sabotage you from building up that farm system? So it's tough.
Yeah, so I think there's multiple layers to this question for me. I think it starts out with last year was really a bad year all around for the Giants in terms of development goes. When you look at their farm system top to bottom, you have a lot of guys that had down years last year for the most part. You did have a few guys that stood out. I think Whitman really, picked it up late in the year, and he's like one of those guys that stood out. Obviously, Hayden Birdsong was a huge riser in the system last year. But really overall, you look at a lot of guys and you didn't really get a clear answer on what you have in them as far as like some of the fringe big leaguers like Luis Matos and some of those guys that have graduated from prospect status. But when you look at some of the other guys, you have guys at the top of their farm system who either have recently been drafted, like we're talking this season, or you have guys that are international prospects that are really high ceiling guys that just are really young. So you haven't really seen, you know, any kind of pro production from them as far as being in the States. A lot of it comes from, being out in like the Dominican leagues and stuff like that. So I think it's really just hard for a lot of prospect rankings to really, put the Giants high as I think they should be. I don't see them being, anywhere in the top 15 personally, but I think 15 to 20 is a fair range for the Giants. I really don't see them as the worst farm system in the league at all. One of the sites that recently did a farm system rankings was Bleacher Report, and I just completely disagree with them ranking the Giants 30th. And a lot of it honestly comes down to the way they rank farm systems, and it's all on a tier basis by tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 off of the top 10 guys. And part of the issue is you have Bryce, who's a very clear obvious tier 1 guy, but then you have guys that have very high ceilings that in my opinion are not in the third tier, like Dakota Jordan, Rainer Arias, Joe Whitman. Those are all guys that they put as tier 3 guys. And I just completely disagree on that evaluation. And it really comes down to them not being super proven guys is why they're putting them, that low. But ultimately, I think you do have a lot of trade assets. It just, you need to have these guys show a little bit more this year, and it could completely change the outlook of what they have in house as far as tradable assets go. And then of course the international prospects that are predicted to sign with the Giants here in the next, 2 weeks now, or less than 2 weeks, could completely change these rankings for the Giants on most sites. They're predicted to get the top international prospect outside of Roki Sasaki. So that would completely change the top half of the Giant system.
Yeah. So this is, I love that George threw Sasaki into here. So where I'm going to say, or what I'm going to say is I agree with Ricky where this could change super fast. So right now, obviously Bryce is ranked number 35. I'm just going off of MLB. I don't know what Baseball America, I don't know what their rankings look like. But MLB, they have Bryce ranked number 35. Tibbs is ranked number 88. One thing that we all have to factor, the elephant in the room with the Giants, prospect list, is they've had like 5 different top 100 guys, or 6 or 7 or whatever guys, either graduate off the list because they accumulated too much time in the majors, or they, fell off the list due to whatever performance. Like Carson Whisenhunt, he was ranked, I think, as high as like number 70 last season. And then he fell off because he had a rough year, particularly on the road. He was really dominant at home, had a rough go on the road. But they've had about, I think, 7 guys. Like Marco Luciano was on there. Kyle Harrison was on there. Hayden Birdsong had gotten on the top 100. Casey Schmidt, Luis Matos. And then Elliot Ramos had been. And then he came off a couple years ago. So they've had a lot of guys that are there. And when they do these farm system rankings, so much of it is potential or whatever, prospect ceiling. And then, then they kind of factor in production. And sometimes, I don't necessarily agree as much where they'll like rank a guy super high that's an A ball that's been not impressive at all, but he's very toolsy. I don't, we see that particularly if you are in the blue and white. They tend to be very favorable to those guys. But you see the Giants system right now, and I see a lot of guys that are going to be making their debuts in A ball, because the reality is you look at the top 100 list, there's not a ton of guys in rookie ball. In the complex leagues, Dominican leagues, that you're not going to see a lot of guys in those. So they don't really debut until they get to full season ball. So when I look at the Giants list, I see Jordan, Arias, Whitman, and then obviously Walker Martin had a disappointing year last season, but he's still a guy that has high-end tools, second-round pick. A lot of guys had a first-round grade on him, 2013. So he's the kind of guy that these lists really like. So I see those 4 guys as people that if they have really solid years, we could potentially see all 4 of those guys climb onto the list. And then based on, what we have beyond that, like I mentioned, most of these guys don't really debut until they get to full season ball. Johnny Level's a guy I really like. He's super toolsy. He could probably shoot up the list pretty fast. You have guys like Jacob Christian, who he's not going to be super highly rated, at least initially, but he's a guy that with his power potential and things like that, he could climb maybe in a year or 2 if he ends up being really good. Jeremiah Jenkins is another name, some guys like Oliver Tejada. So they have some really nice toolsy players.
Oh, Davidson.
Bo. He's a little older, so I don't know if they would really like that, but you have a lot of these guys that are like right down in A ball right now that are really about to get their first go. So if they hit on some of these guys, you could see their rankings really shoot up rapidly. Now, I'm not predicting all of these guys are going to have good years and end up on the top 100 list, because that's just not realistic. But the main point is just this could change rapidly. It's just unfortunately where they are today, almost all of these guys are unproven in the minor leagues. So the other teams are just looking at it going, well, it's a toolsy guy, but I'm not giving, that can't be your centerpiece on these deals. In a year where all of these guys have gotten a full season and full season ball, hopefully, it might be a different story. So the Giants next season, I think, will have a lot more luck when it comes to trying to get trades done, or maybe even by midseason. Maybe they make it, if they surprise some people and they're competitive, maybe they make a deadline deal and they have a little more to offer at that point. So I do feel like there's a lot of potential. And then to everyone's point, there's guys like Hoswar Gonzalez. He's going to be probably the second he gets to A ball, he's going to be a guy that shoots up the rankings super fast. They're getting Gene Macaris and Julian Barreto. Those are 2 other guys that are going to get 7-figure signing bonuses. They could be, viewed pretty highly in a year or 2 when they get to the full season ball. So, I mean, those guys take time because they play a lot of times a year in the summer league, then they go to the complex league, and just takes them some time to get to full season ball. But when they get there, don't be shocked if they get ranked super highly.
Yeah. Joshua Gonzalez is going to be, he'll be in like the top, probably 6 or 7 guys right away, just because of his status. You saw that with Arias and, guys like Luciano. They usually throw guys in like in that range pretty quickly, if they're the top of their free agent or their international prospect class. And there's honestly a lot of shuffling that needs to be done to like the MLB rankings, for example. There's guys that are, way high up there because they're college guys, they're drafted highly, they haven't really done anything. And then there's younger guys that they just haven't really caught on to yet. Like Cody said, you have a lot of guys that have been playing outside of the U.S. and haven't even entered rookie ball yet, but they're super high upside guys. So I do think there is a lot of depth and potential in the system. I mean, I specifically remember some of the years when the Giants were actually winning World Series where the system had gotten very barren, and even guys down in the 15 to 30 range in the Giants system were just very low ceiling, very mediocre floor type players. And I don't really feel like the Giants have that. There's a ton of high ceiling guys, especially in the most recent draft class. The most recent draft class is loaded with tons of power hitting for the Giants. So like Cody said, I think that's something we could see really take off this year, come trade deadline time.
Yeah. Like this, just kind of to Ricky's point, like some of these guys that are still playing over in the DSL and things like that. This was Johnny Leville, who was their big international signee in 2023. 2024 signing period. He was last January. He was their big signee. He's gotten, they give out the comps for different players, and he got like Rafael Furcal comps. Is he going to be that player? Probably not, but that was kind of the comparison with his game. And he showed up, he bulked up a bit. All of a sudden he has 22 extra base hits and 18 stolen bases with hits 275 and a 910 OPS as a 17-year-old in the summer league. So he's going to climb the Giants rankings. I think it was down in the 20s last season. He's up to 13. He'll probably start the year in the complex league if he has a really good time or if he has a good production in the complex league. Maybe he gets up to San Jose next season. And that's when you could see a guy like this jump on the list. A guy like Rainer Arias, people are super high on. But unfortunately for him, he's had 2 really bad wrist injuries the last 2 years where it's kind of killed his production. And he hasn't really been able to show what he can be. So it's entirely possible he'll probably start the year in San Jose. If he stays healthy, I think first and foremost, we'll be able to see what he can do. And if he's really productive, don't be shocked if he just rockets up lists, because there are a lot of people around baseball and a lot of scouts and a lot of people that do these lists and these publications that openly talk about how high they are on him. I think MLB.com wrote a list of their breakout they chose a breakout prospect for every team. Jim Callis and those guys, they named Rainer Arias as their guy. And kind of what I'm saying, same thing. They're like, if he stays healthy, look out. This guy can be really good. So it could change quick. That's all we're going to say as far as, the Giants farm system at this point, because we don't agree that it's ranked as poorly as it is. They're deeper than they've been in years past, top to bottom, but they just kind of lack the high-end talent right now, but that could change.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Ricky said earlier. It's they're insulting our intelligence, guys.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's a huge year for development. Like I said, you have a bunch of these guys that have graduated from prospect status, and we've got to see what they can do at the big league level. And now you're looking at a huge pool of guys that are in the, low A and high A levels. And we really need to see some production out of them if we want to, really have the farm system loaded up with a lot of tradable assets, because the talent's definitely there. But ultimately, when you have scouts from other teams going and looking at our farm, they need to see these guys on the field, and they need to see production ultimately before they're going to sign off on, oh yeah, go ahead and make that trade with the Giants for, their number 2 and number 5 prospects for our guy. They need to see these guys on the field. Like Reggie Crawford's another guy. He's not super highly ranked, but if he's actually on the field and can stay healthy for a full season, it completely changes the outlook people are going to have on him, because he has, high-end closer type potential if he actually fulfills it and stays healthy. So a lot can change.
And that's where like Manassian's job when he was in Milwaukee, where he was a director of pro personnel, like that's their job, is to like be able to provide scouting reports on all players in professional ball. So when you're going to that guy, when Buster Posey's going to his version of whoever their director of pro personnel is, I mean, Manassian did it so much that he's probably pretty well versed in it, we would assume. But when they go to that guy, like that guy needs to have been able to see these players at more than just the college level in the recent seasons. And the Giants just have had so many guys that have been hurt, or they're just now hitting pro ball. So, fingers crossed. And exactly Ricky's point, 100% agree. It's not just that we're hoping these guys are great so they can be great in San Francisco. You want these guys to be really good because you need tradable assets. Like that's the reality. And they don't currently really have that right now, other than at the major league level. And I do question how willing they are to move guys like Harrison Birdsong Obviously Bailey's not going anywhere. Ramos isn't going anywhere. So like there are guys up at the major league level that I don't think there's as much willingness. So if you're going to limit yourself to more what's down in the farm, it gets tricky.
It's to your guys' point. It sucks because the Giants have, value, quote unquote, in their very, very low farm system. Like you guys pointed out, some of those younger international guys, low A ball to high A ball, and then nothing in the middle, and then a little bit of value at the very top with those guys you touched on with Harrison and Birdsong and stuff like that. So it's like it's that in between gap that you need to fill with some talent. And it sucks because that's where a lot of your tradable assets would come from. And that's where you're lacking talent the most in your system. So that's got to fix that little in between part.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big year too for guys like James Tibbs and even Dakota Jordan, just because they were, guys that spent a couple seasons in college ball, and they're guys that you want to see rise quickly. Obviously, Dakota Jordan is a very raw prospect still, but if those guys, actually produce this year and can rise quickly like they should, given, age and college experience, those are guys that could completely change your outlook on trades this year too. Like James Tibbs could be, that guy that you can actually, have headline a trade rather than having to go and include Bryce, which they obviously seem kind of hesitant to do. But Tibbs is a guy playing the outfield that you may be able to afford to get rid of if you go and bring in a veteran guy to, say, plug in at left field. So he's somebody to really keep an eye on and see if he can bounce back from the little struggles he had after getting drafted last year.
Yeah. He's a guy that just wanted the season to go like 2 or 3 more weeks, because that last week of the year in high A, he finally turned it around and he just mashed for like a week, and then the season ended. And I'm like, this guy was pissed that the season just ended.
Yeah, it would have been cool to see him in like the fall league or something.
Yeah,
For sure.
Definitely.